In 1643, there appeared among the mystics a monk, Father Kircher, who taught a complete philosophy of universal magnetism. His numerous works embrace many of the subjects merely hinted at by Paracelsus. Kircher accounts for every feeling in human nature as results of changes in our magnetic condition. Anger, jealousy, friendship, love, and hatred are all modifications of the magnetic atmosphere, which is developed in us and constantly emanates from us. Love is one of the most variable, and therefore the aspects of it are numberless. Spiritual love, that of a mother for her child, of an artist for some particular art. Love is pure friendship, are purely magnetic manifestations of sympathy in congenial natures. The magnetism of pure love is the originator of every created thing. It is especially in the countries unblessed with civilization that we should seek for an explanation of the nature and observe the effects of that subtle power which ancient philosophers called the world's soul. In the East only, and on the boundless tracts of unexplored Africa, will the student of psychology find abundant food for his truth-hungering soul. The reason is obvious. The atmosphere in populous neighborhoods is badly vitiated by the smoke and fumes of manufactories, steam engines, railroads, and steamboats, and especially by the miasmatic exhalations of the living and the dead. Nature is as dependent as a human being upon conditions before she can work, and her mighty breathing, so to say, can be as easily interfered with, impeded, and arrested, and the correlation of her forces destroyed in a given spot, as though she were a man. Not only climate, but also occult influences daily felt not only modify the physio-psychological nature of man, but even after the constitution of so-called inorganic matter in a degree of not fairly realized by European science. Thus, the London Medical and Surgical Journal advises surgeons not to carry lancets to Calcutta because it has been found by personal experience that English steel could not bear the atmosphere of India. So a bunch of English or American keys will be completely covered with rust 24 hours after having been brought to Egypt, while objects made of native steel in these countries remain unoxidized. So too it has been found that a Siberian shaman who is given stupendous proofs of his occult powers among his native Shukshin is gradually and often completely deprived of such powers when coming into smoky and foggy London. Is the inner organism of man less sensitive to climatic influences than a bit of steel? If not, then why should we cast doubt upon the testimony of travelers who may have seen the shaman day after day exhibit a phenomena of the most astounding character in his native country and deny the possibility of such powers and such phenomena only because he cannot do as much in London or Paris? In his lecture on the lost arts, Wendell Phillips proves that besides the psychological nature of man being affected by a change of climate, Oriental people have physical senses far more acute than the Europeans. The French dyers of lions, whom no one can surpass in skill, he says, have a theory that there is a certain delicate shade of blue that Europeans cannot see, and in Kashmir, where the girls make shawls worth $30,000, they will show him, the dyer of lions, 300 distinct colors which he not only cannot make, but cannot even distinguish. If there is such a vast difference between the acuteness of the external senses of two races, why should there not be the same in their psychological powers? Moreover, the eye of a Kashmir girl is able to see objectively a color which doesn't exist, but which, being inappreciable by the European, is therefore non-existent for him. Why then not concede that some peculiarly endowed organisms, which are thought to be possessed of that mysterious faculty called second sight, see their pictures as objectively as the girl sees the colors, and that therefore the former, instead of mere objective hallucinations called forth by imagination, are, on the contrary, reflections of real things and persons impressed upon the astral ether, as explained by the old philosophy of the Chaldean oracles, and surmised by these modern discoverers, Babbage, Jevons, and the authors of the Unseen Universe. Man, says von Helmont, is the mirror of the universe, and his triple nature stands in relationship to all things. From the remotest ages, the philosophers have maintained the singular power of music over certain diseases, especially of the nervous class. Kircher recommends it, having experienced its good effects in himself, and he gives an elaborate description of the instrument he employed. It was a harmonica composed of 5 tumblers of a very thin glass placed in a row. In 2 of them were 2 different varieties of wine, in the 3rd brandy, in the 4th oil, in the 5th water. He extracted 5 melodious sounds from them in the usual way by merely rubbing his finger on the edges of the tumblers. The sound has an attractive property. It draws out disease, which streams out to encounter the musical wave, and the 2, blending together, disappear in space. Asclepiades employed music for the same purpose some 20 centuries ago. He blew a trumpet to cure sciatica, and its prolonged sound making the fibers of the nerves to palpitate, the pain invariably subsided. Democritus, in like manner, affirmed that many diseases could be cured by the melodious sounds of a flute. Mesmer used this very harmonica described by Kircher for his magnetic cures. The celebrated Scotchman Maxwell offered to prove to various medical faculties that with certain magnetic means at his disposal he would cure any of the diseases abandoned by them as incurable, such as epilepsy, impotence, insanity, lameness, dropsy, and the most obstinate fevers. The familiar story of the exorcism of the evil spirit from God that obsessed Saul will recur to everyone in this connection. It is thus related, "And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him." Healing, to deserve the name, requires either faith in the patient or robust health united with a strong will in the operator. With expectancy supplemented by faith, one can cure himself of almost any morbific condition. The tomb of a saint, a holy relic, a talisman, a bit of paper, or a garment that has been handled by the supposed healer, a nostrum, a penance, or a ceremonial, the laying on of hands, or a few words impressively pronounced. Either will do. It is a question of temperament, imagination, self-cure. In thousands of instances, the doctor, the priest, or the relic has had credit for healings that were solely and simply due to the patient's unconscious will. The woman with the bloody issue who pressed through the throng to touch the robe of Jesus was told that her faith had made her whole. The influence of mind over the body is so powerful that it has effected miracles at all ages. But what if the healer be morally diseased? The consequences may be infinitely more mischievous, for it is easier to cure a bodily disease than cleanse a constitution affected with moral turpitude. The mystery of Morzine, Sabin, and that of the Jansenists is still as great a mystery for physiologists as for psychologists. If the gift of prophecy, as well as hysteria and convulsions, can be imparted by infection, why not every vice? The healer in such a case conveys to his patient, who is now his victim, the moral poison that infects his own mind and heart. His magnetic touch is defilement, his glance profanation. Against this insidious taint there is no protection for the passively receptive subject. The healer holds him under his power, spellbound and powerless, as the serpent holds a poor weak bird. The evil that one such healing medium can effect is incalculably great, and such healers there are by the hundred. It is simply ridiculous and absurd to require from every investigator who comes forward as a witness to the marvels of the day and psychological phenomena the diploma of a Master of Arts and Sciences. The experience of the past 40 years is an evidence that it is not always the minds which are the most scientifically trained that are the best in matters of simple common sense and honest truth. Nothing blinds like fanaticism or a one-sided view of a question. They pull down and destroy every vestige of spiritual things, but they erect nothing. We cannot get such signs with either retorts or crucibles, they say. Hence, it's all but a delusion. In this age of cold reason and prejudice, even the church has to look to science for help. Creeds built upon sand and high-towering but rootless dogmas crumble down under the cold breath of research and pull down true religion in their fall. But the longing for some outward sign of a God and a life hereafter remains as tenaciously as ever in the human heart. In vain is all sophistry of science. It can never stifle the voice of nature. Only her representatives have poisoned the pure waters of simple faith, and now humanity mirrors itself in waters made turbid with all the mud stirred up from the bottom of the once pure spring. The anthropomorphic God of our fathers is replaced by anthropomorphic monsters, and what is still worse, by the reflection of humanity itself in these waters, whose ripples send it back the distorted images of truth and facts as evoked by its misguided imagination. For certain men who deny the evidence of their own senses as to phenomena produced in their own country and before numerous witnesses, the narratives to be found in classical books and in the notes of travelers must, of course, seem absurd. But what we will never be able to understand is the collective stubbornness of the academies in the face of such bitter lessons in the past to these institutions, which have so often darkened counsel by words without knowledge. Like the Lord answering Job out of the whirlwind, magic can say to modern science, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding." And who art thou who dare say to nature, "Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed"? There are some peculiar preparations of gold, silver, and mercury, also of naphtha, petroleum, and other bituminous oils. Alchemists also name the oil of camphor and amber, the lapis asbestos sao amianthus, the lapis charistius, cyprius, and linum vivum sao cretium, as employed for such lamps. They affirm that such matter can be prepared either of gold or silver, reduced to fluid, and indicate that gold is the fittest pabulum for their wondrous flame, as of all metals, gold wastes the least when either heated or melted, and moreover can be made to reabsorb its oily humidity as soon as exhaled, so continuously feeding its own flame when it is once lighted. The Kabbalists assert that the secret was known to Moses, who had learned it from the Egyptians, and that the lamp ordered by the Lord to burn on the tabernacle was an inextinguishable lamp. "And thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure oil olive, beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always." Exodus 20. The ancients made the wick of their perpetual lamps from another stone also, which they called lapis charistius. Mr. George S. Lewes expresses a wise thing in the following sentence: "When any man says that phenomena are produced by no known physical laws, he declares he knows the laws by which they are produced." Our physicists pride themselves on the achievements of our century and exchange antiphonal hymns of praise. The eloquent diction of their class lectures, their flowery phraseology, require but a slight modification to change these lectures into melodious sonnets. Our modern Petrarchs, Dantes, and Torquato Tassos rival with the troubadours of old in poetical effusion. In their unbounded glorification of matter, they sing the amorous commingling of the wandering atoms and the loving interchange of protoplasms, and lament the coquettish fickleness of forces which play so provokingly at hide-and-seek with our grave professors in the great drama of life, called by them force correlation. Proclaiming matter sole and autocratic sovereign of the boundless universe, they would forcibly divorce her from her consort and place the widowed queen on the great throne of nature made vacant by the exiled spirit. And now they try to make her appear as attractive as they can by incensing and worshiping at the shrine of their own building. Do they forget, or are they utterly unaware of the fact that in the absence of its legitimate sovereign, this throne is but a whitened sepulchre inside of which is all rottenness and corruption? that matter without the spirit which vivifies it, and of which it is but the gross purgation, to use a Hermetic expression, is nothing but a soulless corpse whose limbs, in order to be moved in predetermined directions, require an intelligent operator at the great galvanic battery called life. In what particular is the knowledge of the present century so superior to that of the ancients? When we say knowledge, we do not mean that brilliant, clear definition of our modern scholars of particulars to the most trifling detail in every branch of exact science, of that tuition which finds an appropriate term for every detail, insignificant and microscopic as it may be, a name for every nerve and artery in human animal organisms, an appellation for every cell, filament, and rib in a plant, but the philosophical and ultimate expression of every truth in nature. The unprofitableness of modern scientific research is evinced in the fact that while we have a name for the most trivial particle of mineral, plant, animal, and man, the wisest of our teachers are unable to tell us anything definite about the vital force which produces the changes in these several kingdoms. It is necessary to seek further for corroboration of this statement than the works of our highest scientific authorities themselves. If science has made such colossal strides during these latter days, if we have such clear ideas of natural laws than the ancients, why are our inquiries as to the nature and source of life unanswered? Science tells us that heat may be shown to develop electricity. Electricity produces heat, and magnetism to evolve electricity, and vice versa. Motion, they tell us, results from motion itself, and so on ad infinitum. This is the ABC of occultism and of the earliest alchemists. The indestructibility of matter and force being discovered and proved, the great problem of eternity is solved. What need have we more of spirit? Its uselessness is henceforth scientifically demonstrated. I love that. They knew as well as our physicists that when a force has disappeared, it has simply been converted into another force. That which science calls gravitation, the ancients and the medieval Hermetists called magnetism, attraction, affinity. It is the universal law which is understood by Plato and explained in Timaeus as the attraction of lesser bodies to larger ones and of similar bodies to similar, the latter exhibiting a magnetic power rather than following the law of gravitation. The anti-Aristotelian formula that gravity causes all bodies to descend with equal rapidity without reference to their weight, the difference being caused by some other unknown agency, would seem to point a great deal more forcibly to magnetism than to gravitation, the former attracting rather in virtue of the substance than of the weight. A thorough familiarity with the occult faculties of everything existing in nature, visible as well as invisible, their mutual relations, attractions, and repulsions, the cause of these, traced to the spiritual principle which pervades and animates all things, the ability to furnish the best conditions for this principle to manifest itself. In other words, a profound and exhaustive knowledge of natural law. This was and is the basis of magic. We are in a barren period, the 18th century, during which the malignant fever of skepticism broke out so irrepressibly, has entailed unbelief as an hereditary disease upon the 19th. The divine intellect is veiled in man. His animal brain alone philosophizes. Every sentence of Pythagoras, like most of the ancient maxims, has a dual signification. And while it had an occult physical meaning, expressed literally in its words, it embodied a moral precept, which is explained by Iamblichus in his Life of Pythagoras. Now let us turn to the oldest written records left us by the Chaldeans, the Hermetic Book of Numbers, and see what we shall find in the allegorical language of Hermes, Cadmos or Tahuti, the thrice great Trismegistus. In the beginning of time, the great invisible one had his holy hands full of celestial matter, which he scattered throughout the infinity, and lo, behold, it became balls of fire and balls of clay. And they scattered like the moving metal into many smaller balls, and began their ceaseless turning, and some of them which were balls of fire became balls of clay. And the balls of clay became balls of fire, and the balls of fire were waiting their time to become balls of clay. And the others envied them and bided their time to become balls of pure divine fire. Could anyone ask a clear definition of the cosmic changes which Mr. Proctor so elegantly expounds? We challenge anyone to indicate a single passage in the works of Hermes which proves him guilty of that crowning absurdity of the Church of Rome, which assumed, upon the geocentric theory of astronomy, that the heavenly bodies were made for our use and pleasure, and that it was worthwhile for the only Son of God to descend upon this cosmic mote and die in expiation for our sins. Mr. Proctor tells us of a liquid, non-permanent shell of uncongealed matter enclosing a viscous plastic ocean, within which there is another interior solid globe rotating. We, on our part, turn to the Magia Adamica of Eugenius Philalethes, published in 1650, and at page 12 we find him quoting from Trismegistus in the following terms. Hermes affirmeth that in the beginning the earth was a quagmire or quivering kind of jelly, it being nothing else but water congealed by the incubation and heat of the divine spirit. Cum ad hoc, saith he, terra tremula esset, lucente sol compacta est. In the same work, Philalethes, speaking in his quaint symbolical way, says, the earth is invisible. On my soul it is so, and which is more, the eye of man never saw the earth, nor can it be seen without art. To make this element invisible is the greatest secret in magic. As for this feculent, gross body upon which we walk, it is a compost, and no earth, but it hath earth in it. In a word, all the elements are visible but one, namely the earth, and when thou hast attained to so much perfection as to know why God hath placed the earth in abscondido, thou hast an excellent figure whereby to know God himself, and how he is visible, how invisible. Ages before savants of the 19th century came into existence, a wise man of the Orient thus expressed himself in addressing the invisible deity, for thy almighty hand that made the world of formless matter. There is much more contained in this language than we are willing to explain, but we will say that the secret is worth the seeking. Perhaps in this formless matter, the pre-Adamite earth, is contained a potency with which Messrs. Tyndall and Huxley would be glad to acquaint themselves. More definite is the language of Marcus Antoninus in his discourse to himself. The nature of the universe delights not in anything so much as to alter all things and present them under another form. This is her conceit, to play one game and begin another. Matter is placed before her like a piece of wax, and she shapes it to all forms and figures. Now she makes a bird, then out of the bird a beast, now a flower, then a frog, and she is pleased with her own magical performances, as men are with their own fancies. The slow development from pre-existing forms was a doctrine with the Rosicrucian Illuminati. The Tres Matres showed Hermes the mysterious progress of their work before they condescended to reveal themselves to medieval alchemists. Now in the Hermetic dialect, these three mothers are the symbol of light, heat, and electricity, or magnetism, the two latter being as convertible as the whole of the forces or agents which have a place assigned them in the modern force correlation. Synesius mentions books of stone which he found in the temple of Memphis, on which was engraved the following sentence: one nature delights in another, one nature overcomes another, one nature overrules another, and the whole of them are one. The Hermeticists and the later Rosicrucians held that all things visible and invisible were produced by the contention of light with darkness, and that every particle of matter contains within itself a spark of the divine essence, or light, spirit, which, through its tendency to free itself from the entanglement and return to the central source, produced motion in the particles, and from motion, forms were born. A witty joke may sound very prettily, even a learned treatise, and the word coincidence may be applied to anything we are unwilling to accept. But a sophism is not a truism, still less is it a mathematical demonstration, which alone ought to serve as a beacon, to astronomers at least. Astrology is a science as infallible as astronomy itself, with the condition, however, that its interpreters must be equally infallible. And it is this condition, sine qua non, so very difficult to realization, that has always proved a stumbling block to both. Astrology is to exact astronomy, what psychology is to exact physiology. In astrology and psychology, one has to step beyond the visible world of matter and enter into the domain of transcendent spirit. It is the old struggle between the Platonic and Aristotelian schools, and it is not in our century of Sadducean skepticism that the former will prevail over the latter. The Beer's Nimrod, or Temple of Borsippa, had 7 stages, symbolical of the concentric circles of the 7 spheres. In his astronomical aspect, Zeus Dionysus has his origin in the zodiac, the ancient solar year. In Libya, he assumed the form of a ram and is identical with the Egyptian Amun, who begat Osiris, the Taurian god. Osiris is also a personified emanation of the father-sun, and himself the sun in Taurus, the parent sun being the sun in Aries. As the latter, Jupiter is in the guise of a ram, and as Jupiter Dionysus or Jupiter Osiris, he is the bull. This animal is, as it is well known, the symbol of the creative power. Moreover, the Kabbalah explains, though the medium of one of its chief expounders, Simon ben Iokai, the origin of this strange worship of the bulls and cows. It is neither Darwin nor Huxley, the founders of the doctrine of evolution and its necessary complement, the transformation of species, that can find anything against the rationality of this symbol, except perhaps a natural feeling of uneasiness upon finding that they were preceded by the ancients, even in this particular modern discovery. Elsewhere, we will give the doctrine of the Kabbalists as taught by Simon ben Iokai. The marked respect paid by the Buddhists to the sapphire stone, which was also sacred to Luna in every other country, may be found based on something more scientifically exact than a mere groundless superstition. They ascribe to it a sacred magical power, which every student of psychological mesmerism will readily understand, for its polished and deep blue surface produces extraordinary somnambulic phenomena. The varied influence of the prismatic colors on the growth of vegetation, and especially that of the blue ray, has been recognized but recently. Orpheus teaches how it is possible to affect a whole audience by means of a lodestone. Pythagoras pays a particular attention to the color and nature of precious stones, while Apollonius of Tyana imparts to his disciples the secret virtues of each, and changes his jeweled rings daily, using a particular stone for every day of the month and according to the laws of judicial astrology. The Buddhists assert that the sapphire produces peace of mind, equanimity, and chases all evil thoughts by establishing a healthy circulation in man. So does an electric battery. With its well-directed fluid, say our electricians, the sapphire, say the Buddhists, will open barred doors and dwellings for the spirit of man. It produces a desire for prayer and brings with it more peace than any other gem. But he who would wear it must lead a pure and holy life. Voltaire, the greatest of infidels of the 18th century, used to say that if there were no God, people would have to invent one. Volney, another materialist, nowhere throughout his numerous writings denies the existence of God. On the contrary, he plainly asserts several times that the universe is the work of the all-wise and is convinced that there is a supreme agent, a universal and identical artificer designed by the name of God. Voltaire becomes, toward the end of his life, Pythagorical and concludes by saying, "I have consumed 40 years of my pilgrimage, seeking the philosopher's stone called truth. I have consulted all the adepts of antiquity, Epicurus and Augustine, Plato and Malebranche, and I still remain in ignorance. All that I have been able to obtain by comparing and combining the system of Plato, of the tutor of Alexander, Pythagoras, and the Oriental is this: chance is a word void of sense. The world is arranged according to mathematical laws. The laws of Manu are the doctrines of Plato, Philo, Zoroaster, Pythagoras, and of the Kabbalah. The esotericism of every religion may be solved by the latter. The Kabbalistic doctrine of the allegorical father and son is identical with the groundwork of Buddhism. Moses could not reveal to the multitude the sublime secrets of religious speculation nor the cosmogony of the universe, the whole resting upon the Hindu illusion, a clever mask veiling the sanctum sanctorum, and which has misled so many theological commentators. The earth, which, when covered with snow, cannot be affected by the sun's rays, is warmest, where the snow is deepest. Almost nothing is known of the laws of magnetism and other imponderable agents. Almost nothing of their effects upon our bodies and minds. Even that which is known and moreover perfectly demonstrated is attributed to chance and curious coincidences. But we do know by these coincidences that there are periods when certain diseases, propensities, fortunes, and misfortunes of humanity are more rife than at others. Certain kinds of music throw us into frenzies. Some exalt the soul to religious aspirations. In fine, there is scarcely human creation which does not respond to certain vibrations of the atmosphere. It is the same with colors. Some excite us, some soothe and please. The nun clothes herself in black to typify the despondency of a faith crushed under the sense of original sin. The bride robes herself in white. Red inflames the anger of certain animals. If we and the animals are affected by vibrations acting upon a very minute scale, why may we not be influenced in the mass by vibrations acting upon a grand scale as the effect of combined stellar influences? If we now refer to medieval ages, we find among others Cornelius Agrippa telling us precisely the same. The ever-changing universal force, the soul of the world, can fecundate anything by infusing in it its own celestial properties. Arranged according to the formula taught by science, these objects receive the gift of communicating to us their virtue. It is sufficient to wear them, to feel them immediately operating on the soul as on the body. Human soul possesses, from the fact of its being of the same essence as all creation, a marvelous power. One who possesses the secret is enabled to rise in science and knowledge as high as his imagination will carry him. But he does that only on the condition of becoming closely united to this universal force. Truth, even the future, can be then made ever present to the eyes of the soul. And this fact has been many times demonstrated by things coming to pass as they were seen and described beforehand. Time and space vanish before the eagle eye of the immortal soul. Her power becomes boundless. She can shoot through space and envelop with her presence a man, no matter at what distance. She can plunge and penetrate him through, and make him hear the voice of the person she belongs to, as if that person were in the room. When the initiate, says Levy in his term, has become quite lucid, he communicates and directs at will the magnetic vibrations in the mass of astral light. Transformed in human light at the moment of the conception, it, the light, becomes the first envelope of the soul. By combination with the subtlest fluids, it forms an ethereal body, or the sidereal phantom, which is entirely disengaged only at the moment of death. To project this ethereal body at no matter what distance, to render it more objective and tangible by condensing over its fluidic form the waves of the parent essence, is the great secret of the adept magician. Theurgical magic is the last expression of occult psychological science. The academicians reject it as the hallucination of diseased brains, or brand it with the opprobrium of charlatanry. We deny to them most emphatically the right of expressing their opinion on a subject which they have never investigated. They have no more right in their present state of knowledge to judge of magic and spiritualism than a Fuji Islander to venture his opinion about the labors of Faraday or Agassiz. About all they can do on any one day is to correct the errors of the preceding day. Nearly 3,000 years ago, or earlier than the days of Pythagoras, the ancient philosophers claimed that light was ponderable, hence matter, and that light was force. The corpuscular theory, owing to certain Newtonian failures to account for it, was laughed down, and the undulatory theory, which proclaimed light imponderable, accepted. And now the world is startled by Mr. Crookes weighing light with his radiometer. The Pythagoreans held that neither the sun nor the stars were the sources of light and heat, and that the former was but an agent. But the modern schools teach the contrary. The researches of Barth and Schweiger leave us in little or no doubt that the ancients were well acquainted with the mutual attractions of iron and the lodestone, as well as with the positive and negative properties of electricity, by whatever name they may have called it. The reciprocal magnetic relations of planetary orbs, which are all magnets, was with them an accepted fact, and aerolites were not only called by them magnetic stones, but used in the mysteries for purposes to which we now apply the magnet. If Galvani's modern discovery can set in motion the limbs of a dead frog and force a dead man's face to express, by the distortion of its features, the most varied emotions, from joy to diabolical rage, despair and horror, the pagan priests, unless the combined evidence of the most trustworthy men of antiquity is not to be relied upon, accomplished the still greater wonders of making their stone and metal statues to sweat and laugh. The celestial pure fire of the pagan altar was electricity drawn from the astral light. Statues, therefore, if properly prepared, might, without any accusation of superstition, be allowed to have the property of imparting health and disease by contact, as well as any modern galvanic belt or overcharged battery. One of the very few commentators on old Greek and Latin authors who have given their just dues to the ancients for their mental development is Thomas Taylor. In his translation of Iamblichus's Life of Pythagoras, we find him remarking as follows. Since Pythagoras, as Iamblichus informs us, was initiated in all the mysteries of Biblis and Tyre, in the sacred operations of the Syrians, and in the mysteries of the Phoenicians, and also that he spent 22 years in the Adyta of temples in Egypt, associated with the Magians of Babylon. According to the ancient doctrines, the soulless elemental spirits were evolved by the ceaseless motion inherent in the astral light. Light is force, and the latter is produced by the will, as this will proceeds from an intelligence which cannot err, for it has nothing of the material organs of human thought in it, being the superfine, pure emanation of the highest divinity itself, Plato's father. It proceeds from the beginning of time, according to immutable laws, to evolve the elementary fabric requisite for subsequent generations of what we term human races. All of the latter, whether belonging to this planet or some other of the myriads in space, have their earthly bodies evolved in the matrix out of the bodies of a certain class of these elemental beings which have passed away in the invisible worlds. In the ancient philosophy, there was no missing link to be supplied by what Tyndall calls an educated imagination, no hiatus to be filled with volumes of materialistic speculations made necessary by the absurd attempt to solve an equation with but one set of quantities. Our ignorant ancestors traced the law of evolution throughout the whole universe, as by gradual progression from the star cloudlet to the development of the physical body of man, the rule holds good. So from the universal ether to the incarnate human spirit, they traced one uninterrupted series of entities. These evolutions were from the world of spirit into the world of gross matter, and through that, back again to the source of all things. The descent of species was to them a descent from the spirit, primal source of all, to the degradation of matter. In this complete chain of unfoldings, the elementary spiritual beings had as distinct a place midway between the extremes as Mr. Darwin's missing link between the ape and man. The student is never farther from truth than when he believes himself nearest its discovery. The mastery of every doctrine of the perplexing Buddhist system can be attained only by proceeding strictly according to the Pythagorean and Platonic method, from universals down to particulars. The key to it lies in the refined and mystical tenets of the spiritual influx of divine life. Here, annihilation refers but to matter, that of the visible as well as of the invisible body, for the astral soul, perispirit, is still matter, however sublimated. Thus, annihilation means, with the Buddhistical philosophy, only a dispersion of matter in whatever form or semblance of form it may be. For everything that bears a shape was created, and thus must sooner or later perish, i.e., change that shape. Therefore, as something temporary, though seeming to be permanent, it is but an illusion, Maya. For as eternity has neither beginning nor end, the more or less prolonged duration of some particular form passes, as it were, like an instantaneous flash of lightning. Before we have the time to realize that we have seen it, it is gone and passed away forever. Hence, even our astral bodies, pure ether, are but illusions of matter, so long as they retain their terrestrial outline. The latter changes, says the Buddhist, according to the merits or demerits of the person during his lifetime, and this is metempsychosis. When the spiritual entity breaks loose forever from every particle of matter, then only it enters upon the eternal and unchangeable nirvana. He exists in spirit, in nothing, as a form, as a shape, a semblance. He's completely annihilated, and thus will die no more. For spirit alone is no Maya, but the only reality in an illusionary universe of ever-passing forms. To accuse Buddhistical philosophy of rejecting a supreme being, God, and the soul's immortality of atheism, in short, on the ground that according to their doctrines, nirvana means annihilation, and svabhavat is not a person but nothing, is simply absurd. The N, or ayin, of the Jewish En Sof, also means nihil, or nothing, that which is not, quo ad nos. But no one has ever ventured to twit the Jews with atheism. In both cases, the real meaning of the term nothing carries with it the idea that God is not a thing, not a concrete or visible being to which a name expressive of any object known to us on earth may be applied with propriety. Starting as a pure and perfect spiritual being, the Adam of the second chapter of Genesis, not satisfied with the position allotted to him by the Demiurgus, who is the eldest first begotten, the Adam Kadmon, Adam the second, the man of dust, strives in his pride to become creator in his turn. Evolved out of the androgynous Kadmon, this Adam is himself an androgyne, for according to the oldest beliefs presented allegorically in Plato's Timaeus, the prototypes of our races were all enclosed in a microcosmic tree which grew and developed within and under the great mundane or macrocosmic tree. Divine spirit being considered a unity, however numerous the rays of the great spiritual sun, man has still had his origin, like all other forms, whether organic or otherwise, in this one fount of eternal light. Were we even to reject the hypothesis of an androgynous man in connection with the physical evolution, the significance of the allegory in its spiritual sense would remain unimpaired. So long as the first God-man, symbolizing the two first principles of creation, the dual male and female element, had no thought of good and evil, he could not hypostasize woman, for she was in him as he was in her. It was only when, as a result of the evil hints of the serpent, matter, the latter condensed itself and cooled on the spiritual man in its contact with the elements, that the fruits of the man tree, who is himself that tree of knowledge, appeared to his view. From this moment, the androgynal union ceased. Man evolved out of himself the woman as a separate entity. I love it. They have broken the thread between pure spirit and pure matter. Henceforth, they will create no more spiritually. And by the sole power of their will, man has become a physical creator, and the kingdom of spirit can be won only by a long imprisonment in matter. The meaning of Gogard, the Hellenic tree of life, the sacred oak among whose luxuriant branches a serpent dwells and cannot be dislodged, thus becomes apparent. Creeping out from the primordial illus, the mundane snake grows more material and waxes in strength and power with every new evolution.